following is a production of Cary TV, the Town of Cary's government access channel.
Good afternoon and welcome to the November Town of Cary Planning and Development Committee meeting. I'm Councilman Don Frantz. To my left is Mayor Pro Tem Gale Adcock. To my right, Councilmember Ed Yerha. And to his right, Town Manager Ben Shiver. We have two items on the agenda, one of which has been pulled from discussion, but we also have the request to add consideration of for another discussion item to review of issues and a request for policy direction regarding the potential ordinance requirements to address mobile food units, also known as food trucks. Is the committee okay with adding that item?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that item will be added under discussion. And then again, the Phillips Place Townhome Subdivision Plan resubmittal waiver has been pulled from our agenda. So if anybody's here for that, you can go home. First up on the consent agenda is consideration of the fiscal year 2014 Community Development Block Grant Funds. Does anybody have any questions, comments, concerns? Okay. All right. Well, we'll move that along to the council meeting agenda on consent. The one and only discussion item will be food trucks, and we'll hear from Mr. Olma of our staff.
Thank you. Good evening, council. Staff's been working and reviewing the potential of ordinance requirements to address food trucks. Lots of communities have all kinds of different names for them. Mobile food units, mobile vendors, those kinds of things. There's been an increased interest in this activity, not only in town, but in neighboring jurisdictions as part of special events. So the reason this is coming before you is, as presently written, town code and the LDO only address, like under the code, certain aspects of some of these, like ice cream trucks from a peddler license standpoint. And as you know, under the LDO, if a use is not specifically allowed, then it's prohibited. So we need to find a way to be able to deal with this particular activity. We came to you earlier this year, said staff go ahead and start working on the provisions, so we've done that. We've looked at many other jurisdictions' ordinances, reports related to this topic generally, and your staff report outlines for you sort of the main pieces or aspects of any food truck ordinance that we've found. And of course, they range everywhere from defining all of these to, on the end, enforcing the regulations that we have. So we have, and we also have recommendations on different parts of these that are in your staff report, but there really are 3 that we're interested in getting council direction on before we actually begin to write the provisions. One deals with aspects of the location. Where would such activities be allowed to occur? Another one is an aspect of the operational standards, how they might operate. And the third deals with aesthetics. And in your report, the first is item 2. Item 4 is the operational, and item 7 is the deals with the aesthetics. And we also would like to hear from council if you have comments on any of those other aspects, but we think we can handle all of those. So turning to the location, the discussion here relates to where this activity could occur, and primarily it's a split between, do you want to consider allowing it only on private property? So it might be a vacant lot or a parking lot in a commercial area, or would it be something the council would be interested in considering allowing on public property, streets, and you see these, I mean, parked in a parking space on the side of a street, vending their food product at lunchtime. So that's the main piece of this. Staff's recommendation is that we sort of ease into this first and allow them only on private property, and then we would look for ways to be able to address that. Or they could be on public property, but as part of a special event. And so the town would be able to control that. We already have special event procedures, so we'd be able to build that in. So that's one part of it. And then if allowed only on private property, then we would be looking for what kind of zoning, what kind of situation would that be allowed. We wouldn't be suggesting it occur in residential zoning districts. So what we line out for you is that it would be non-residential districts, and we'd actually look at GC, O&I, ORD, we'd be working on those as we craft the regulations. Another aspect of location that a lot of these ordinances deal with is the separation between quote-unquote brick and mortar restaurants. A lot of debate about, these are mobile or fairly mobile, and how they interact with existing or restaurants that are in a facility. And a lot of communities, and this varies all over the map, from no requirement to thousands of feet from an existing brick and mortar restaurant. At this point, because we haven't seen a whole lot of interest in this really as a main topic, we would stay away from adding at this early phase a spacing requirement and then having to worry about measuring those distances from restaurants. And because they are commercial in nature, we would recommend that however we would set this up, there would be things like setbacks from adjoining property, particularly if it's residential, just dealing with a commercial activity next to residential. So you may want to comment and weigh in on that one first before we move to the others.
Does that sound good for you all? Want to go ahead and deal with location first and then here, or the other 2 items?
I can do the other 2.
Probably. Would you prefer to go ahead?
Everything first?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead and cover everything.
Okay. The other on operational is some of these ordinances work on, and we have these provisions on other temporary uses in town where you're only allowed to do something 90 days a year or 120 days or 180 or whatever. That adds complexity and confusion, and we would recommend that we not consider that kind of provision in the ordinance as well. And in terms of other operational things, we'd be looking again at setbacks. We could deal with things like hours of operation, how you allow or deal with seating and tables. I mean, if these are more in a more permanent condition, then allowing those kinds of accommodations we'll have to address. There are all kinds of other safety, sanitation, health requirements that we would be dealing with in terms of operational. And then finally, the aesthetic one, number 7 in your report, is just generally the question about signage and what we would be interested in doing in terms of that. We would suggest that things like sandwich boards, temporary signs be allowed in front or adjacent to a mobile food truck when it's placed there. Getting into the area of actually having to then regulate the sign on the truck, technically it would be a what would we call it, a vehicle sign, operating that way, but there is no business. I mean, that is the business, so we would suggest not getting into having to worry about the dimensions and colors and other aspects of whatever information that they had applied or painted onto the sides of these vehicles. So those are the three key areas. And again, any other comments on other pieces of this? What we would end up doing is then start to craft the language. It will include, like we've done on other ordinances, changes to LDO and the town code, so we have to make sure all of those sync together. And we also provide for you our almost standard language here in terms of fiscal implications for adding another set of regulations, managing something like this with review and permitting and spacing and information and all of those kinds of things. So another reason why we would steer more towards simple if we can to make it easier on us to administer. So that's where we stand on this topic.
All right, thank you, Ms. Roma. Questions or comments? Who wants to go first?
Want me to go first?
Mr.
Sure.
Yerha.
The last word?
Well, it wouldn't be the last word, but sure.
It's an excellent staff report, by the way. All
Thank
kinds
you.
of things in here I'd never thought of, you know.
We have additional reading if you'd like to look at that.
I bet you do. It's certainly a lot to digest. That's a little pun intended.
Move along.
I'll move along. Basically, I'm not, I have no burning desire to see an abundance of food trucks in Cary, frankly. But then I have no strong opinion, and I'm not really opposed to them either, so it's hard to look at this. But if we're looking at an ordinance, if we're going to have an ordinance, I guess some of my comments are in terms of location and everything. I know where we see them today in the area, of course not in Cary, but in the areas at construction sites at lunchtime. I think that's very appropriate to have. I think it's very appropriate to have them at festivals, events, special occasions. The concept of the food truck rodeo, which other towns have, is kind of a cool thing to do, from time to time. I just don't want to see them all over town everywhere, I guess is the point. Private property makes sense with a permitting sort of structure there. Non-residential makes sense. All of your recommendations that you have in that section I concur with. As far as appearance, if they're transitory, if they're moving around, if it's a mobile vehicle, I really don't care a whole lot about aesthetics in that case. I really would rather not see these food trucks become permanent or semi-permanent things. Now, what the definition of semi-permanent is, that's up for grabs, I guess. But I'd rather not see a food truck parked somewhere all the time, every time I go by there. And if we are going in that direction, then I think aesthetics probably comes into play a little bit. And I don't know if we should exempt food trucks from existing ordinances, in that case. But I'd prefer them not to be permanent or semi-permanent anyway, in which case aesthetics doesn't really matter. But the only thing that you do mention in here in the location section that I have to think more about is the distance or the spacing requirement from brick and mortar restaurants, where you're not recommending that. Restaurant business is a tough business, and we've had a lot of what I consider really good restaurants just not make it. And I'd hate to give them more competition where it's not necessary. It's just a thought. I don't know if a food truck would want to park near a restaurant, to be honest with you. And if the restaurant has the private property, I'm sure they're not going to volunteer to put one on their private property if we only have it on private property. So it may be a non-issue. I don't know. So you may be right in this first wave not to do that. But I prefer maybe to hear from some of the restaurant owners if we get to that point, to see what they say. And here's another pun coming along. We might want to have the restaurant owners have a stakeholders meeting. You see, stake? Well,
Yeah.
To see whether, what their feelings are like that. Their feelings would be more valuable than mine, probably. But anyway, those are just some thoughts. I think I've touched on most of your stuff there. Personally, I'm not crying out to have an ordinance of any sort here, but those are some thoughts if we do.
Well, that's a good segue to my comments there.
Good.
Jeff, can you estimate for us how much staff time's already gone into prepare the meeting that y'all had, and just ballpark it for me, and coming up with what I agree with it is a really robust staff report?
Oh, well, we met earlier this year when we brought to you originally. We have staff from engineering, planning, legal, and police working on this, and we've met maybe 3 or 4 times in 1.5 hour meetings. So
So up
whatever
6
those are,
hours
several
times
staff members
multiple staff.
meeting.
I'll tell you why I'm asking. I'm with Ed. You know, I'm not against food trucks. In fact, I like them. But I go back to something you said at the beginning of your remarks. There's not been a lot of interest in this. You investigated it because we asked you to, and I think about the amount of staff time it's going to take to go forward with this. At the same time, we're trying to finish up Imagine Cary, which involves, you know, a great deal of planning staff. The work you've already, you know, the whole staff is already doing with no increase in staff. Development picking up, thankfully, with the improvement in the economy. And I just wonder if it's wise to invest that amount of staff time in something that's not a major problem. If this were a problem, you know, it'd be different. But again, I'm not against this. But I just wanted to preface my remarks with that first, which is I don't know that this is the right time to put that much effort into something that's not critical to the town.
And we do get occasional inquiries, or because of the activity in other jurisdictions in the region, then
Sure.
we tend to get the questions. And there are, at various sites, already activity occurring that we have no mechanism to deal with. So if you add those up, there's probably some suggestion that we ought to do something about this topic, but maybe as simple or as easy as we can if we go there.
Well, I understand that, and I think, you know, part of the staff report says, you know, any regulation should be crafted to ensure minimal impacts on the town resources, and the best way to do that is make any ordinance language as simple to understand and implement and enforce as possible. So I'll go back and then just add a few things to Mr. Yerha's excellent comments. You know, in terms of location, I think starting with private property is absolutely the thing to do. I worry about parking by the side of the road and the traffic and safety implications for that. So I think that's makes perfect sense. I do think at some point the proximity to brick and mortar restaurants will be an issue, and I actually feel a little stronger about this than Mr. Yerha in terms of a food truck being parked. I think they should be mobile. I think they should come in and I think they should leave. And I think that will make them less of a competition to a brick and mortar restaurant. Because, and I'm not owning a restaurant myself, but just assuming that it's one thing to have someone come in and park down the street from you on private property, you know, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. It's another thing if it's parked there for a week at a time. And I don't think parking them should be what we go for. I think they should be transitory by nature. And I think that could at least take some of the sting out of this. And I do think, as Mr. Yerha said, that at the point that this would come to ordinance, of course, we'd have a public hearing, and I'm sure we would hear from the restaurant community about their concerns. It could work both ways. It could pull people in, and they might think they're going to have a burrito at the food truck, and they end up having, you know, a wonderful meal at another place. It may pull them downtown or wherever these things are, and they'll discover things they didn't know. So there are the pros and the cons to that. So I'm okay with not having a spacing requirement or even a numerical limit. I think that would be really difficult to do. So having said all that about location, let me move on to operational standards. I had a question about permits. So I think it's fine to grant the permit, and then, of course, there are the other fees associated with that, and then an annual renewal. Would the permit actually specify the exact space they're allowed to use? Like they're in this site, that permit gives them permission to use that particular space? It would pretty much have to, wouldn't it? Or somebody
Yes.
else could come and they'd be jockeying for position.
I mean, they would, and some of the permits, and I think we pointed out, or we've looked at, the permit actually is applied for by the property owner
Right.
and the mobile food truck operator, and it would specify a location, so
Okay.
we'd be able to monitor it.
Okay.
Once they become then more mobile and start moving around, then that becomes, how do you manage
Well,
that?
what I
would
mean
the
by
permit
mobile
before-
is going home.
Right.
Mobile means not moving to another site. Mobile means
Means
leaving the
good.
area, to me.
Okay.
Hence,
Yeah,
it's
sort of a
mobile. you know? So, but thanks for answering that question. I will say, I don't think it's a good idea to allow seating outside the food truck because it begins to seem like more of a restaurant that way. I mean, people go to food trucks because they don't mind eating standing up. You know, they have a hot dog, they have a slice of pizza, whatever, and that comes with the territory. If you want to go sit down, you choose a different venue. Appreciate your nod to the health department in terms of the health requirements in the state. It makes sense. And going to the aesthetics, I agree with Ed that if they're going to be transitory, we can't, you know, I don't think we can specify that they adhere to our usual standards because most of these things are painted. And they're not going to. I mean, they're not going to not use high-impact colors, and they're not going to have a sign that's 3 by 5 or whatever. I mean, it's just not going to happen. So I think that's unrealistic, and I think we could see how that works out. I think seeing where they go, how many there are, will make a difference. And in terms of sandwich boards, sandwich signs in areas where they're already allowed, I think you're probably going to have to limit the number because I think, again, of the safety issues. I mean, these are usually in spaces, particularly if you've got more than one in an area, that it can be quite congested, and I just think about the public safety aspects of that. So giving that information to add to Mr. Yerha's comments, but in the context of best use of staff time, I'll just say that if council wants to pursue this, you know, I'm not against it. I think you've come with some really good ideas and a way to keep it simple, and I will go with the majority.
Thank you, Ms. Adcock. To follow up on my colleague's comments, I agree with only on private property for now, except public property during special events and things like that. I totally concur. We don't want them just pulling off on the side of the road somewhere causing a traffic hazard. The only thing we said non-residential districts, but what about a construction site of a subdivision? That would be residential district, right?
Those are the kinds of things we'd have to play
Yeah, so you all fix that.
devil's advocate
I'm
through this
good.
and test these as we start to write the regulations.
I do feel probably, I guess, the most strongly about the separation between brick and mortar buildings and the food trucks. You know, as a small business owner, if somebody else with a truck wanted to open up a similar business just 100 feet down the road from me, I'd have a problem with that. I understand we start getting in a little, it gets complicated when you've got, say, a whole shopping center. The shopping center property owner grants permission for the food truck to be there, but there's also 2 restaurants in that shopping center. So I don't think it should be thousands of feet, but a couple hundred, yeah. I mean, I think that's very reasonable. Operational, time limits, to me, this one gets kind of complex. You referred to them as transitory. This is their business, so they might be at one location for 2 hours, but then they're going to this construction site for lunch. Now they're going to Raleigh somewhere for 2 hours, and they might come back to Cary for something else. So to me, it's as long as they're not parking and staying at the same place for hours. You know, and in my reality, 2 hours is probably too long. You know, most folks that take a lunchtime, it's about an hour or so, and that's it. So if they're going somewhere to serve folks at lunch or dinner time, then maybe they should only be there for an hour or two, and then, you know, crank it up and move on. Let's see. Totally agree. No seating, no tables, and I'm actually going to say no sandwich boards, no additional signage beyond what's on the vehicle or the trailer or the mobile food unit. It's just, you know, you don't want them popping up sandwich boards and signs, and it just, they're a food truck. They're not a temporary restaurant, you know, that I don't know they should be treated as such. Aesthetics, yeah, I mean, honestly, the business right next door to me, they operate a food truck, and it's painted up real bright and colorful, and I think it kind of adds to the, I don't know.
Ambiance.
Not quite the word. These things have a cult following. I mean, they're just, it's almost bizarre to me, but it does add to that. And trying to police that would just get crazy. So I guess as long as they don't start putting up white twinkle lights and neon signs on them, I guess we're okay, right, Ed?
Good point.
Some chickens on the roof.
I'm cool with the chicken on the roof. I do also have concerns about staff time, but at the same time, I also remember us spending a lot of time on chickens, so 10 or 15 people in town could have them. So, I mean, if we're,
6.
I thought we got up to like 10. Okay, so 6 people could have them. So at the end of the day, how many food trucks are we going to have coming to Cary, and how much staff time is it? You know, we're talking 6, 10, 12 for a whole year. No, let's try it and see how it works, and if we find out that it's causing a burden, then we look at staffing accordingly and adjusting permit fees and such accordingly to cover those costs. I guess those are my comments. I mean, I do agree those were the 3 that I guess seemed to need the most discussion and council input on. I think we're mostly on the same page, but I guess maybe a few differences, but
Spacing between brick and mortar restaurants, the seating, and the signs are the only differences I heard.
which, you're okay with seating and?
Seating and signs doesn't bother me a whole lot. I'm okay one way or the other with that. But I had no objection to putting out a few chairs and a signboard. If they're only there for a certain period of time, I don't see that's really a problem.
And I'm opposed to that, and Ms. Adcock?
I'd prefer not to do that.
Okay, so we're kind of split on that one.
But it's a minor thing.
Yeah.
And the other one?
Distancing between brick and
Distance
mortar
between
restaurants.
restaurants, right. You, I don't think, had a concern, is that?
I was okay with starting with no.
No
And I
limits.
think Ed said the same.
You had,
Yeah, I prefer to see a distance, but again, that would be a showstopper for me if we thought that wasn't going to be. I'd like to see what the restaurant owners had to say about
yeah,
it.
and that's a good point right there, too. I think we all would agree we don't want them parking in front of the restaurant.
Right.
But how you codify that, that's up to you professionals to figure out. Was there anything else that you got all
I think
that you need?
I think you covered all those, so we'll.
Okay, so this,
And
Yeah,
our
no, you
team
were gonna
is,
ask- you were
our
gonna ask
team
the
is
process
taking
question. I
notes
was
to
gonna
help me
ask
out, so.
okay, the next steps on this are,
Ultimately, what we do is go back and actually now start drafting the ordinance language.
So
and then
based
we-
on just what the 3 of us say.
so it doesn't need
Or
to come to
through,
council?
I mean, if you make a recommendation to count, I mean, it would go to council like P&D items do next
Okay,
week.
because
Okay,
I
so
think
it will
that's
be on.
important.
And then after
yeah.
that, we would start
Okay.
working on ordinance language, and that would have to come back through the normal ordinance amendment process.
Okay,
Right.
okay.
So it'll go to, it'll go,
The next
well, it-
council meeting.
but it won't go on consent,
No.
right? Okay, it'll go on
If you
discussion.
want
Okay.
discussion.
And I'm
I got you.
pretty sure the other 4 would probably have some
Oh, I feel sure there'll be some.
comments and like to weigh in on this
Okay,
one.
that's
so.
all I was curious about. That's good.
Okay, and then like any other ordinance amendment, it would, go through the normal steps and public hearings and all that before. So we still might not be allowing food trucks for another 6 months or so. All right, well, good comments. And seeing no more further business
Thank
before
you.
us, we stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been a production of Cary TV. Visit the Town of Cary's website at townofcary.org.